Today's headline is The Old Indian. The subheadline says, from the Charleston Evening News. It says, among the vestiges which darken the shadows of the past, few are more interesting than the Indian's character. It has been the fate of this people to display very lofty traits, nationally and individually, and to pass from men's eyes like the phantom of a dream. They were the progenitors of a people now rich in intellect and glorious in civilization, only to retire before that wave of population which they themselves had invited. They were plants flourishing only in the shade, plants which expired in the full blaze of the sun of improvement. In viewing the degeneracy of a people who from a lofty condition have fallen into one of moral or physical slavery, as is the case of the Greeks, our pity is mixed up with contempt. But with the Indian tribes it's different. In their case, we see a courageous and magnanimous nation, full of the revenge but boldness of savage life, stepping back from before a conquering but not always just people, submitting reluctantly to the fate of war, and giving up their lands in many instances only with their lives. It is not our purpose to object to the destiny which made our fathers the instruments of our settlement and prosperity. Doubtless it was for wise purposes in the advancement of intellectual and moral freedom. But in the perspective of the picture which portrays their early trials, we also see the Indian. We see a wild but happy people, content amidst their native forests, suddenly deprived of their heritage, driven from their homes, the bones of their ancestors dispersed with the plow, and they forced either to seek a new shelter further in the forest, from which a new invasion was presently to drive them, or to remain and dwindle into insignificance, the victims of physical, moral, and intellectual deterioration. The Cherokees were the last to retire to the west. At a ball play with the Creeks, they won that lovely country of green valleys and smiling hills, now covered by the northern sections of Georgia and Alabama. There they lived contentedly, and it was their boast that they had never shed the white man's blood. A more noble race never existed. Manly, generous, and brave, their forms and countenances displayed their characteristics of a bold but magnanimous people. It was my lot a day or two since to meet one of them, who, abandoned by his people, still lingered in the noble country where he was born. He imparted to me some faint memorials of his race. He loved to dwell on the history of his people and to point out various scenes where remarkable events took place. I met him at a romantic spot in Cherokee County, Alabama, known as Blue Pond. Blue Pond lies at the base of Lookout Mountain, a ridge which rises in middle Alabama, and which, in the northeast direction, runs with greater or less elevation into the edge of Tennessee. On the top of it, just above Blue Pond, are the Yalu Falls. The little stream of Yalu, which produced these falls, runs along the mountain in a southern direction and is surrounded with scenery sublime and romantic enough to rouse the coldest bosom to a love of nature. After flowing along, calm and unruffled as one of those bright streams we often see painted on the eastern sky just before sunrise, we find its course suddenly interrupted by a range of broken rocks, which stretch across its bosom, breaking the unity of its waters into 1,000 ripples. The detached streamlets immediately below these rocks unite and pour down a precipice of nearly 200 feet, dashing into one of the wildest chasms we ever beheld, a broad river of snowy waves, and filling the whole basin below with spray and smoking mist. Do you see, said the old chief as we stood on the side of the gull, yonder cavern, pointing to a recess which had been washed by the stream before a new channel had been worn to the left of it. I will tell you about the place. In the old time, long before the step of the white man had been seen in this country, a friendly tribe of Indians pitched their tents on this mountain. The chief had rendered himself celebrated in the wars, which used to be waged against the Creeks. He was happy in the evening of his days in an only son, who bid fair, from his courage and daring, to rival his father in the affections of the tribe. When the little Woonega was about 10 years old, the Creeks had invaded the tents of his father's people. They were defeated and ran off. In their haste, they left behind a little white boy the same age of Woonega, and whom they had evidently taken prisoner from one of the lower Carolina settlements. The old chief resolved to make him the companion of his son, and to this end adopted him into his family, and gave him the name of Yalu, signifying the red and white leaves in autumn. As the boys grew up, their affections twined around each other. They hunted the wild deer together, and were scarcely ever apart. In the progress of time, Woonega became enamored with the daughter of a neighboring chief, the Rising Fawn. Her father lived far north on the mountains, and her name is now living in connection with a spot in Dade County, Georgia. To hunt in the neighborhood of the old chief the father of Rising Fawn, came with his family and warriors. They pitched their tents by Blue Pond, and there Wunega saw the lovely maid. Yalu had become thoroughly acquainted with the language and customs of the Indians, and was of course the confidant of Wunega. He became himself a victim of the charms of the Rising Fawn. The time was approaching when the nuptials of Wunega and the Rising Fawn were to be celebrated. The Rising Fawn was to be carried on an arbor of flowers, accompanied by maidens and young men to the tent of her lover, and there he was to receive her in a tent lined with the soft skins of the game he had himself hunted and killed. Wunega had gone far into the mountains in search of a spotted fawn, on whose skin the feet of his affianced bride were to rest. He reached the edge of the river and stopped to rest on the highest point of the rocky wall which rose up from it. Far in the south, the blue ridges of the Talladega Mountains rose up against the sky. At his feet, the foam of the falls boiled as a great cauldron. The sun was pouring long golden streams through the forest, and a train of wild geese were seeking their homes with hoarse screams towards the north. Suddenly 2 forms were seen, moving in the midst of evening in yonder cavern. How the heart of Wunega throbbed against his sturdy breast, how his head reeled, as clasped in each other's arms, he beheld Yalu, his treacherous friend, and his still more treacherous bride. The first impulse was to bury an arrow in the breasts which leaned upon each other in a union which seemed to make them one. Leaning anxiously forwards, he loosened a rock, and was nearly precipitated into the roaring cataract beneath him. The detached rock went bounding from point to point below, and startled the now wretched lovers from their dream of security. Rising in alarm, they saw the injured and almost mad Wunega before them. Pouring from his eye the most indignant flashes, he looked alternately from one to the other. Now rage seemed to seize upon his soul, now love to soften anger. When at last he cried with choked utterance, "O white man, did I break my faith with thee? You said there is a great spirit who looks with pleasure upon good and frowns upon evil. Let him judge between us. My people love to say we never shed the white man's blood, nor will I. Many long years made you my brother. Go, you love one another. May the Great Spirit make you happy. I turn my back upon you. I go to the setting sun. When you see him set, think of Wunega. He goes down like the setting sun. Remember, the Indian loves mercy." Saying this, he bounded away, and had vanished long before the lovers had recovered from their surprise. Until a few years passed, a family of half-breeds lived in the valleys below. They were the descendants of Yalu and the Rising Fawn. This story comes from the great state of Georgia, being reported in the Southern Recorder of May 27, 1851. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.